Hello and welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast with your hosts Brian Auten and Chad Gross. Join us for conversations and interviews on the topics of apologetics, evangelism, and the Christian worldview.
Serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law.
Hello and welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast. I'm Chad Gross.
And this is Brian Auten.
And we are super excited to have returning guest J. Warner Wallace, cold case homicide detective, with his son, believe it or not, Jimmy Wallace, who also is involved in police work, talking about their new graphic novel, Case Files, Murder and Meeting.
Let's go to the interview.
Let's get ready. Switch me on.
Well, J. Warner Wallace is with us again, as well as Jimmy Wallace. Welcome, guys, to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having us. Yeah, looking forward to this.
Well, now we've got two Jim Wallaces here. So we've got Jimmy and Jay. Like, how do we differentiate?
Well, I was Jimmy until he was born. I was Jimmy my whole life because I have a dad whose name is Jim. Jimmy's the second to my dad. And so I lost that name. And my wife would call me Jimmy until we were, I was 27 years old. And then for a while, this kid was little Jimmy. Like, where's little Jimmy? Because I was the Jimmy. But at some point, he just gets the name, and now he won't let go of it. So I'm stuck with Jim.
Well, there's no other variations. They're all taken. So I made him drop the first name and go by Warner.
Oh,
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I have a grandson, and Jimmy's got a nephew. His name is James. So we've got every version of Jim, James, and Jimmy you can do. So
now, J. Warner, you've written a lot of different books. Everyone really knows you well by J. Warner Wallace. You've written all these cold case sort of books, history as a police officer and a detective and things. And that's pretty amazing. Now, what some people may not know is that your son is sort of following in your footsteps in doing police work, detective work. And now the listener can't see this right now, but behind Jimmy, I thought these were like case files. There's like this huge treasure trove, apparently boxes of comic books. Now, why so many comic books, and how does that lead into this interview today there, Jimmy?
Oh, why? There might not be a good answer for why. You want to start a Christian podcast talking about all your material possessions.
It's an investment, right? You can sell those things.
I'd like to think that they're worth something, but maybe one or two of them. But for the most part, I don't have that kind of money to be a collector in that way. But I grew up reading comic books. I had a lot of uncles in my life who liked comic books. And one uncle in particular left a relatively sizable collection of really classic 60s, 70s, and early 80s comics to me. Well, he left it at my grandma's house, and then I just discovered it and got really hooked on that. And my dad was always really good about kind of supporting us in reading comics. He'd always give us $1 a month to go to the comic book store, and we could go to the quarter bin, which is like where all the old comics that stores try and get rid of sit. Now I don't even know if there's a quarter bin. It's probably like $1 each, but at that time they were a quarter. So you could get 4 for that month, So I just always grew up reading comic books. I loved comic books, and I think I always would have dreamed to do something in comics, but I didn't really think that was a realistic goal. So it wasn't really something I was actively pursuing until relatively recently, just these last few years as we worked on Case Files.
Excellent.
Can you guys tell that we were on a police officer's budget?
Yes, $1. Yes. Yeah. And Jimmy, you're spot on. The bin now is about $1.25 for the comics they're trying to get rid of. So
yeah.
So I have to ask before we get to the book, I have to ask, who is your favorite? Do you have a favorite comic book hero?
Oh, that's so hard. Because it's like choosing between your children. If you pick one, I'm going to later regret it. And
tell us one or two comparison. Tell us like 2 or 3 that you like. Tell us
the
like
one
2 or 3.
that I do kind of default to is I love Spider-Man, and in particular, I in that original collection of my uncle's comics were some of the original Stan Lee and John Romita Spider-Mans. And then a bunch of the reprints. There used to be an old series, Marvel Tales. I don't know how big into comics you guys are, but yes. Marvel Tales was like in the, I think, 70s or 80s. They were reprinting the 60s stuff. So I grew up kind of reading the Stan Lee Spider-Man. I would still probably say it would be hard for me to pick something over that original. I think he did like 110 issues. I would say it's hard for me to pick something above that, but I don't know. Maybe on a particular day, maybe I'd say something else.
Yeah. I totally can appreciate that. That's where I'm at. It would depend on the day who I would pick. And it would be hard to pick one. So I understood that.
So, Chad, you sound like you're actually a pretty big comic book fan, yeah?
I am indeed. Yes.
Yes.
We're talking he's been a Spider-Man before in a costume.
Oh yeah, that's kind of a story. Yeah. So there's a branch. If you Google Marvel character appearances, there's actually a branch where, they hire people to dress as the comic book heroes. Yeah. So for like 3 years, I worked for them and portrayed Spider-Man, Hulk, Daredevil, and I did Cap once, but I'm actually not tall enough. Because they actually are kind of particular.
Now he's doing David Wood.
You know what? That is so funny because you could easily do him. Yeah,
okay, so I got to tell you this. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I got to tell you this. So Jim, when I met you, it was in Mount Airy. So you know where I'm talking about, Steve Schrader, exactly. Mount Airy, right? Okay. So I was there when David Wood was speaking. Yeah. I had 3 different people walk up to me and start talking to me about his talk because they thought I was him.
And I had to live. They had seen him live.
Yes.
That's hilarious.
So I had to so it got to the point where they would start talking and I would just like point like he's over there. They would look at me and they'd look at him and go, whoa. And then they'd walk away.
Oh, you were very kind. I think I would have probably faked being David and said some obnoxious things that he got to pay for later. Because that would be an awesome opportunity to mess with him. Anyway.
I'm actually a Muslim. I love the Quran.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just flip the whole narrative. Yeah, that would have been funny.
Yeah. So this concept of a graphic novel, I mean, you wanted, you had this desire to kind of go the route of writing a comic, didn't think it was on the table. And then all of a sudden, this opportunity comes about. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, we had heard through the grapevine. I'm not sure exactly how. I mean, it might have just been through a press release. I can't remember exactly how we first heard about it. But David C. Cook, which is a nonprofit Christian book publisher that published I'd say the majority of my dad's past books.
Sure.
Especially his early books, Cold Case Christianity, came through David C. Cook. They had purchased a small comic book company called Corvus Comics. It's a small independent publisher. They were doing adaptations of The Chosen. They're based out of Colorado, and they were purchased by David C. Cook. And they had said, hey, we want to use this to get into the graphic novel space more. David C. Cook has the Action Bible, which has been absolutely a huge hit for them.
I read that. Mm-hmm.
And they actually are the publisher of the longest running Christian comic book. It's been running essentially without a break. I don't think there's any significant break since like the 40s. It's called Pix. Nowadays, it's mostly reprint material, but it's still going strong. If it's out there, I never even heard of it until in the last few years. And I'm always looking for Christian comics. But so they've been in comics for a long time, but they were trying to get back into it, creating original content. And we were like, hey, my dad already has a relationship with them. There might be something we can do with kind of still in the cold case Christianity lane, but that could get into comic books. And why not reach out to this? I had, it was always a dream. So let's give it a shot. And luckily they were able to, we were able to give a pitch that they liked and move forward with the project.
That's really cool. Like some real providence there.
Yeah, it felt that way. It really did, because I knew that Jimmy wanted to do something like this someday. And we just, I don't even know. It's such a collaborative effort, because we're not doing the art on this. I do all my own art in my own books, but this is a different genre. This is very different. And if you want it to be kind of perceived as part of the genre that people are familiar with, you really need to use established comic book artists, which we used up for this. But because it requires somebody, you just can't like submit the book to a publisher and say, we're ready to go. You have to find a publisher that has the bandwidth and the access, the kind of art directors and access to artists, because, there's going to be the sketcher, the inker, the letterer, and the colorist. And so these are it's a big team. So I think we learned from this lesson that this is something that if we could get one, we felt really good about it. Now let's try for two. It's like one of those things.
Yeah. So what was it like working together? Like, what did that look like?
A nightmare. No, I'm just kidding. I think that I don't need to take up too much of your time. I barely give my dad any time to speak, but for me, it was very sentimental. I grew up, the son of a pastor and a Christian apologist, and I always dreamed about doing something in apologetics, or at least something in ministry, something for God, something that kind of followed in his footsteps. And so to be able to do something not only for God but with him was a dream come true.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it's not hard to work with Jimmy. I mean, He's got his head in the right place. He knows what he wants to do, something that is going to serve the kingdom well. And we've kind of grew up together as Christians, because I got saved when Jimmy was about 8. And so he saw that process, and then he kind of journeyed with me through all the evidence and kind of my debates with other young Christians or Christians who I was meeting for the first time, and sitting down at the coffee table or sitting down at the dining room table and having those conversations. And so he got to see that. And so we kind of came up together. So it seemed like an easy process. Now, I don't know that everyone has a great relationship with their kids, but part of it for me is I've always been amazed by my kids. So like, I just wanted to do something to advance what he wanted to do. So I really didn't do much other than just kind of contribute to the overarching story. Like what part of the Christian worldview could we most easily kind of a message without being, and also kind of guiding, do we want this to be the typical, every Pollyannish kind of world in which sometimes Christian fiction is written, in which everyone at the end is going to get saved and it's got a beautiful, sweet endings. And this is not the way law enforcement is. This is not the way that criminal cases run. So we thought, well, so I kind of helped him shape some of that. But when it comes down to the conversations, I mean, this is 90-10 where he's developing, because I don't even think, and I've been saying this, it's so, to me, the format in which you screenplay, you're basically storyboarding a screenplay, a movie, and you're just storyboarding it. And you have to think about it in terms of, well, what's the scene we're in? What are the characters we're in? What's the narrative that's going to be in the box? What's the quote bubbles that are going to be in the quotes? I mean, all these things are lined out in the story like a screenplay. So if you like a script for an actor, that's hard. I mean, there's many times when trying to read this with Jimmy, I know that he had a better picture of what it was going to look like, because you got to say, okay, page 6 is going to have six panels. These 6 panels are going to be in this. This is the scenes we're depicting. And he made a good point of saying sometimes, hey, you can't like have this run on too long without a scene change. What are you going to have, 5 pages where it's just the same setting? You have to think about scene changes so that the thing moves faster. And it's like, this is stuff that I don't typically think about in writing nonfiction. So I just deferred that to him and made sure that when it was all over that, and I think also it was a little bit, I think, interesting for Jimmy and I, because he's in a different generation of law enforcement, right? So he's working in a kind of post-COVID lockdown, post-George Floyd kind of world, and also in a different generation of millennial Gen Zs or in law enforcement now. And the language is going to be different. The way we approach things, even the technology we're using is different. Like when I was writing search warrants back in my day, the most sophisticated thing you might write would be like phone tolls. Well, now we're, Jimmy's writing stuff for his social media and internet and geolocations and all this other kind of stuff that we just didn't have to deal with. So it was kind of, some of this, definitely the personalities don't change in law enforcement. So characters don't change. They just reemerge. Okay. But the stuff they're doing does change. And so it was kind of a good combination for us.
I won't confirm or deny what I do at work, but I will say my dad is giving me too much credit and not enough credit to himself. I mean, this was truly like a collaborative effort. When we first sat down on this, we actually we split it up. I don't even know if this is the way we should have done it, but what did we know about starting a comic book? I created 6 characters who I thought represented a variety of, they were kind of like an amalgamation of a variety of people we'd worked with that I thought would work good. They each have different perspectives on life. And then my dad came up with 6 plots, and they started whittling these plots down and trying to plug the characters in and going, hey, how would the characters react in these plots? How should we change the characters? How should we change the plots? And so I think he's giving me a little bit, maybe too much credit there, but it was fun to kind of go back and forth. And it's one thing to read a comic book and think, I kind of understand why I enjoy a certain comic and why I don't enjoy another. But when it comes down to actually doing it, man, it's a lot harder. It's given me a totally different perspective now when I'm reading comics. A lot more respect for the creators involved, because it's difficult.
You kind of mentioned there as being a screenplay, writing a screenplay. So, if this is sort of a movie that you read, how would you describe the movie? What would be the pitch that you would give?
Well, what we're doing here is we're trying to cause people to examine something that's important in life, how we ground human value. And this is something that we see all the time in law enforcement, because you do see that certain crimes get more attention, more public attention than others. And often it comes down to who's the victim. And why is it that some victims get all the attention nationally and some victims don't get reported on at all? And so that's something that we could easily talk about, because it turns out that most of us, and this is true for probably most cops, will ground value in something you've either achieved, something you've earned, something you've become, without grounding it the way that we would ground it as Christians. So for example, if you're working on a homicide team and you get and there's like a murder in Los Angeles County involving a celebrity, you don't think that in that 5-man team, everyone's scrambling to get that case. Like they want to work that case. Why? Because they think that person is somehow, or at least that case is going to be more noteworthy. If they solve it, they're going to get attention for solving it. I mean, this is how crazy this is. So you mean to tell me that somebody else gets killed and that's not as important? So Jimmy did a good job of kind of scratching out how each character also is struggling with his or her own value. Like what makes us, it's about identity, where we place it and how we ground our identity. So we knew we had an opportunity here to at least explore those issues. And then of course we'll have one person maybe in this story, and he's a minor character, who will end up holding a view that's closer to our own as a Christian worldview. And then it can occasionally kind of inform the other characters about where they've gone wrong. And we want to do it without being preachy. So it's hard to kind of walk that line. Mm-hmm. So I think you might be halfway through this book before you even thought, is this a moralistic book? Is this a book with the moral message? Is this a book that maybe is a Christian book? I don't know that it's that obvious in the beginning, because our main character is not a Christian. And then the other thing is, when we get done with this, is everyone going to get saved and baptized? No. I mean, I'm not, I'd like to see everyone in life do that, but we also we hope to have one more at least of these. We start off with the 2-book notion with the publisher, so we don't have to land everything, in the first 30 pages.
Right.
And life isn't that way. So this is a book that is, when we first wrote it, we thought, is this going to be just for adults? Because of the gritty nature of they're going to be you're going to see at least 3 murders in the book. But it turns out that if you're like a junior hire and you're watching anything on legacy TV, and certainly anything streaming, you've already seen worse than this in the weekly crime dramas that are out there. So we feel like this is still open to anybody probably in junior high and up.
I was curious. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, is when I read it, one of the things that I did notice was that it must be difficult to write something like this and toe that line between, you're thinking about, you want your Christian audience to appreciate it, but you also want your unbelieving audience to be able to read it and it to feel real to them, right? And a lot of Christian media is very explicit, right? And it does have the very neat, tidy ending. And so how did you guys arrive at the story that you did and kind of walk that line? Because it seems like a real, wire walk, if you will. Like a balancing act.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. I think what we didn't want to do is do something that would come off as too cheesy too quickly.
Sure.
I didn't want to create something that was Christian in name only, that you could like adapt it into a movie and nobody would ever know that it was ever Christian. Not that somebody's going to adapt our first work into a movie, but I wanted something that was at least truly and explicitly Christian, but somehow also not cheesy. And I love cheesy Christian comics. I love like the old Archie comics that are Christian Archie comics. I don't know if you've ever seen those.
Yeah.
Extremely cheesy, but like that's almost like the draw of them. So I'm not even necessarily criticizing anyone else's stuff, but for us, we're trying to figure out, hey, can we do both? And I don't know if we landed it, but we definitely wanted to try to figure out some way. Yeah, we knew for a Christian audience, we can't have them talking the way that a lot of cops talk, with a lot of really extremely foul language. We also, we don't want to be gratuitous in the violence, but we also didn't want it to be so tame that you didn't see any of the murder. And so really trying to figure out where the line was difficult. And I think there was some back and forth with the publisher about exactly where the line was. We wanted to make sure, and even how to market it. As a Christian publisher, are they going to feel comfortable marketing a book with murders in it to a 6th grader? Probably not. So, we really balanced that back and forth, but we wanted something that at least, whether or not it is real in terms of the exact specific things that are happening, we wanted to at least feel real. And for me, this was one of the things that I saw. This story about the meaning and value of life is something that I saw throughout my career. And I see a lot of my coworkers struggling with it. A lot of cops are great people. They're really great at taking identity in their work. And it's very practical when you're at work because you just throw your 110%, your whole self into your work, and you're probably going to work harder and maybe accomplish more at work. But that's like to the detriment of everything else in their life. And lots of cops, it's not just a trope in fiction. Lots of cops have terrible home lives, and the divorce rate amongst cops is really high. And then I also saw, as people retired out of the career, a lot of like almost like they felt lost. These people who now they're not a cop anymore. That's all they ever were. And what does that mean for them? Where do they see their value? And so I saw a lot of people around me in my life struggling with this sense of identity and where to place it. And I think it's even a temptation I've felt. How much identity should I place in the thing that I do? And so I wanted it to at least feel real, even if the exact wording or the way that they solve the crime is, whether that's real, quote unquote, real or not. Hopefully it feels real.
Well, yeah. I thought it especially felt that way, especially through the kind of looking through Murph's eyes in the graphic novel. I felt that way of the struggle felt very genuine. The moments where he's reflecting on his past, the moments where he's, part of him doesn't want to, I got the sense that part of him doesn't want to do it anymore, but then he doesn't know he wouldn't know what to do if he didn't have it. I really felt that struggle in several scenes through the book with Murph in particular.
That's something that I was also thinking about too, because this is a real struggle, and my wife Susie and I have been doing counseling with we're chaplains with the Billy Graham Association for police officers who are involved in critical incidents, and so we do 24 couples a summer over 6 weeks, and we see this a lot. In terms of so much of why I even talk about identity publicly now is because I see it in this counseling. It's a bigger issue than most of us want to admit. Even those of us who would call ourselves Christians, we struggle keeping our identity in Christ. And so these are some of the things you can kind of look at in this kind of a fictional account. But, how do we do it? How do we provide for a community that loves apologetics? That's what my audience is going to be, are people who want to read more about apologetics. So how do we create a fictional story that will scratch that itch? But also, we want to be creative. We want to take it in a slightly new direction. And for Jimmy, this is at least a first entry point for him. He's got his master's degree at Colorado Christian University through Lee Strobel's program. And it really is an applied apologetics. It's like a very practical apologetics curriculum there that is trying to get people, young people who are taking, and old people who take the program, like to figure out what are you going to do with this? Because I see this all the time, even at Biola, where people will get a master's degree in apologetics and then kind of struggle to figure out how to press that into service. Like how do I take that now and do something with it? Or it's also okay, I think, just to do whatever you were doing before, but do it better. But most of us who get this kind of a master's degree, we do it because we think we're going to turn around and change the world with it. And I think there's two ways to do that, right? One is just through like didactic teaching. Let's just teach you the case for this, the case for that, the evidence for this, the evidence for that. Okay. The other way, though, is just to get you thinking in a Christian worldview direction in everything that you think about. So that's what we're trying to do here. Like, how would this look if you're going to create? And I was just listening to Andrew Clavin the other day. I was a commentator who's got a podcast, and he's an author, and he's always complaining about Christian art. I mean, he complains about it so much, Christian fiction, Christian movies, that I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be nice if there was nothing to complain about? Not that what we're doing is all that fantastic, but we want to at least make an effort. And we want to make sure we avoid the traps that most common people think, like the secular world thinks. You people don't see it clearly, don't see life clearly. It's too simple from your perspective. Well, we know that Christianity survives even in the rough world of murder investigations. So we wanted to be able to write something that explores it in a creative way and also is realistic about what it's depicting.
I really thought the artwork looked great, and I'm wondering what you guys thought about the process of creating something where you're not the artist, but you're the author, and then that seems to me like it could be a big worry to be like, okay, this is our baby. Now someone could make it look horrible. What was the creative process behind that, and did you have feedback? No, change that guy, change this. How did that go?
Well, and then real quick, just to add on to that, like when you created Murph, right? did you have an idea of what Murph looked like in your head and communicate that? Or did they say, this is what we think Murph looks like, and you had to kind of get your head around that? I mean, how did that work too?
Yeah, when we submitted the character, so when we submitted the proposal, we submitted initially very brief, I want to say like 4 or 5 sentence synopsises of what the story would be and the apologetic message behind it. Here's the general plot, or the case they're going to be investigating. Here's the apologetic argument or point we're going to try to get across. And then we submitted to them very brief character descriptions. So we did do descriptions that were like ethnicity, height, weight, gender, and maybe like a couple sentence, maybe 5 or sentences or so description of kind of like their background. Very, very brief. And off of those, concept artists over at David C. Cook did start to draw based on those. And so a lot of them, I think that I would say we kind of stuck to those original ideas, but some of the characters look radically different. Peter Leota was at one point a really massive, he was like the biggest character. He was like a Hulk kind of looking character, massive Samoan dude. And Marco Russo had more of a like suave, kind of like stereotypical pretty boy kind of look. And they've which I felt like he was probably actually the biggest change. He looked totally different than I think either me or my dad had kind of pictured him. But I think that the greatest part of it was we would see these new character designs come in, and they somehow still felt like the same character, even though they looked radically different. I don't know how they were able to accomplish this, but we were very fortunate. I know earlier, so for comic book people like yourselves, I don't really need to explain this, but for the audience, if you're not familiar with comic books, I would say that the writers, earlier we described it as like writing a screenplay. It is kind of like that. We're writing like a page by page kind of breakdown, but the artists are like everything else in a movie. They're the directors and they're actors and the costume designers and the set designers and everything else that you could possibly think of in a movie is on the artists. And so we were really fortunate in this case to have Steve Crespo and Dario Farmasani as our artists. When we pitched the idea, we did not know who the artist attached would be. And so I think there was like some level of like, oh, okay, it'll be great when we see these finally come in. And also there's a lot of creative freedom that's given to the artists. If we said, hey, there's 7 panels on this page and they thought they could do it in 5, or we said it was 5 and they thought it should be 7, they had the freedom as the artist to do that because they need to communicate the story in a visually appealing way. And as writers, we're still limited in terms of how we're visualizing this. But we were so fortunate when we finally saw the pages, and we did have some ability and some notes, but I would say most of the notes that we gave them were relatively minor in terms of changes from the final pages. And they're mostly to do with dialogue. We did some like last minute adjustments to our dialogue, but in terms of the art, there was really not much that we had any voice in. That was all on the artist. And I think if you read the comic and you feel like, hey, this really was good, it's probably because the artists were able to convince you that not our story.
Which is it's a really important truth is that, we're the screenwriters, but like Jimmy said, every other aspect of movie making, every other credit you see at the end of a movie is the artistic team, right? Because they're picking all the sets and designing the sets and the wardrobes and designing all the facial expressions. They're coaching the actors, they're creating it's everything else. So yeah, you're at the mercy of, but these guys gave us their first visions of what the characters were really early. And we did tell them like, okay, so Murph is going to look kind of like this. And so he does, to me, he embodies exactly what I would have thought that character was going to be. And what are we doing here? Like when we create a big character, it's because these are types that you see in law enforcement, because law enforcement is such a rigorous physical job. It's going to be dominated by a couple of different kind of characters. It's either going to be dominated by people who are just big enough that if they make a small tactical error, they're strong enough and big enough and fast enough to make up for the error. It's also going to be dominated by people who maybe aren't as big or fast, but they learn quickly and they're tactically sound from an intellectual perspective. Like they're not going to put themselves in that position because they know they're not big enough to make a mistake. So you get like different types of people, and they come out, they even actually have different physical types. We hire a lot of ex-football players. I mean, if you came you walked in and you said, I've got a bachelor's degree in X, or you said, I just got done playing linebacker at Arizona State, good chance the Arizona State guy's getting hired. as long as you can pass even on a remedial level, everything else, because the job often is breaking up a bar fight or walking into a situation, and just by your physical presence, everyone calms down. So it's like, those are things that you see in law enforcement, and we wanted to kind of image those. And that's true because the nature of the job is such that it is. It's true whether you're working in 1988 when I first got hired, or you're working in Jimmy's generation. It's always true.
I thought you guys did a really good job in the book there. We talked about walking that wire of, being explicit, implicit, however you want to put that. I'm sure there's a better way, but I thought that you guys did have a couple very, I don't know how I would describe it, moments where they left me really pondering, or they hit hard of, you talked about the apologetic message, and obviously in here, the idea is what gives life meaning, what gives it value. Right. And I think it was Ashley is the one that has the new baby, right?
Yes.
Yeah. When she says this, she's at a dead body scene, and she says, "New baby at home, dead body at work. It was hard to reconcile the two. Was life as pointless as it looked at a murder scene, or as meaningful as it felt in her daughter's nursery?" And that just hit me like, man, I feel like even if you've never been to a dead body scene, which thankfully the majority of people haven't, we can certainly relate to that in the sense of our lives. And, sometimes life seems much more meaningful than other times, depending on the moment. And so, in thinking about that, what is your hope and how this will hopefully help an unbeliever kind of turn their head to the gospel, or maybe consider that what does give all this meaning?
Well, I want to hear Jimmy's answer to that, but first let me just say, I think that when you write out of, at some point you are going to end up writing out of your own experiences. You're going to end up expressing your own thoughts. I mean, you just are. I mean, you can say, well, I've written a lot of comic books and I've kind of understand how the genre works, but look, in the end, they ask us to write a comic book. What's it going to be about, do you think? Oh, gee, I wonder. It's going to be about this stuff, because this is the stuff that we actually think about. And, Jimmy's got 2 young babies at home. And when he was writing this, the first one was, so I can see why. These are questions we ask. These are things we're thinking. And so I think if you can just kind of confess to that, look, if Christianity is true, it has to make sense of the ugly world we're living in. And I think that sometimes it's easy for some of us to avoid the ugly. A lot of us, don't have to think about these issues, or we just don't pay attention to these issues. But if you're in any kind of first responder situation, you're going to have to see these things constantly over and over again. They just released an FBI report a couple of weeks ago that said that the average police officer will see 173 critical incidents in their career, where the average person sees 2 or 3 in their life. So to see some of the stuff we're going to have to see, and you to see it all the time, you're either going to go crazy, or you're going to decide in advance that these are not critical incidents, because I got to see them so often. If I'm going to treat them like the average person would treat them, I'm going to go crazy. So I think that, I don't know if that line, I've always wanted to ask Jimmy, I think that line probably comes out of his own thinking. Am I right?
I mean, I think, there's a lot of self-expression, I think, from both of us in this. I don't know if I would say one particular character is me or my dad, or one particular thought is exactly what we would think. But I think that the overall message of the book is something that we've felt or learned through our lives. So these are the thoughts that are kind of on the forefront of our minds. And I would hope that this, I know you were talking about, hey, how does this reach the unbeliever? I would love to think an unbeliever will pick up our niche Christian comic book from this small publisher somehow, and will read it and will be transformed by it. And I hope that Christians who find this comic will give it to their friends. And but if all of this does is reach Christians, I think that for me, that would be still a very edifying experience. Because I'm a comic book reader. I read comics every month, and I read almost no Christian comic books. And the old comics I grew up on as a kid, Stan Lee's Spider-Man we were talking about earlier, there's going to be nothing objectionable in there. It's not Christian. Stan Lee's not a Christian guy, but he's not writing anything that is in any way in conflict. I could have believed that he was a Christian based on what he was including in terms of his content. But today, there's almost no comic book that as a Christian you can read that you're going to not have to hold your nose at some point, or just go, this is the price of any modern media. I'm going to see something that is objectionable morally or whatever. And so I love crime comics. I read crime comics constantly, but every crime comic has some rated R scene that I can't now, probably recommend on a Christian podcast. So if all I can do is just give something to a Christian to go, hey, you're not alone. You like comics. I like comics. We're not the only people out here who enjoy stories, enjoy the medium, and we're not the only people who think like this. That alone would be a big deal. I think in general, when I approach the idea of using fiction to try to tell a story, I just know how much fiction has affected me. I know we're talking about Spider-Man earlier. I've used various examples in various podcasts, but I think my dad was like shocked the first time I said this. I think that sometimes my moral development has been as impacted by fiction as it has been from nonfiction or from scripture or from a Bible study. And it's because I think when you're reading nonfiction, you're thinking about something. But when you're reading fiction, you're living it or you're in it. I'm in that world, even for that short amount of time that I'm reading that story. And so for me, a lot of times stories have caused me to ask the biggest questions. One of the comics I think that I still read today that's still being produced is Nexus. Have you heard of Nexus? It's a pretty small, independent little comic. I don't know if I can recommend. Again, this is not a Christian comic. There's some PG-13 rated R scenes probably thrown throughout there. So I don't know if this is an endorsement. But what's great about Nexus is a comic about a guy who he's got this affliction where he has these nightmares of mass murderers, and the only way to get the nightmares to go away and for him to feel well again is to go and kill the mass murderer. And he doesn't want to kill them. He's not a killer. But he says, I got to go kill them for self-preservation. And he's going to do something good because he's going to take out a mass murderer, but he's going to do something that he finds morally objectionable, which is killing. And so he's just got this constant conflict in him, right? It's one of my favorite superhero sci-fi comics. I highly recommend it if you're willing to look at some potentially objectionable material thrown out there. But that's always, anytime I read a story of Nexus, I'm always thinking about these moral questions, right? It's not a Christian story, and there's not necessarily it's going to point me to a Christian answer, but it's going to make me ask really good questions. Now, I know, because I have an apologetics background and because I grew up in the church, that Christianity has the best answers. But as a Christian creator, I want to hopefully ask the same questions that these secular writers are asking, and then hopefully point you at some point to the better answer.
I love that.
Right. Yeah.
So as we're kind of coming down to the end of our time, you kind of left me on a cliffhanger here at the end of Case Files. I mean, there's so many stories that I'm wondering where these characters are going to end up. So you mentioned that you're hoping for volume 2, right? Can I get a tease, maybe a preview, a hint, something? Throw me a bone.
Well,
come on.
Well, okay. I think I would love to do as many of these as the Christian community wants. Now, you can sometimes you think, well, I think this is worth doing, blah, blah, blah. And then you find out, 2 years in that, no one really cares about it and it's not having the impact you want. So I think this is probably what most publishers are doing also, especially in something serial. Right. If you've got something, I know when I wrote Cold Case Christianity, the next publisher I went to was like, well, do you have another one of those? Like they once they see you've done something, they kind of want and that was what Zondervan said to me. They said, hey, we want something else. And I did have one more piece, which probably 2 more I could have unpacked, but I didn't think there was any need for it. I ended up writing Person of Interest to kind of satisfy that desire on the part of Zondervan. I think that if this is successful and people like the world we've created, the team we've created, the characters we've created, well, then I'm going to try really hard to keep on producing these graphic novels. If it's not with Cook, it'll be with whoever is interested in produce, because this is such a weird. I feel like super blessed. I'm not kidding when I say that the stars seem to align, so we could actually do this book with David C. Cook. I don't know how that's just amazing to me that we got this book out, because I know how many moving parts there are, and it took us over 2 years to get from 0 to 50 on this. It's just a really hard collaborative effort, and not many Christian publishers have the bandwidth and the team available. And trying to hold creative teams together is super hard. I'm just telling you, it's just you start with one creative director, you end with another. It's just a lot of stuff going on. So I think this next book we're looking at is just an extension of this, in which we're going to examine the grounding for moral truth. How do we know something is good or bad? It's just a very simple question. And whereas this book it talks about grounding human value, the next book's going to really explore the idea of what is good and bad and who gets to decide. Because if you think about most of the culture, you really realize this when you're working in gang cultures. Because I'm sure the people who worked the mob back in New York probably also experienced it. There's a whole separate code of conduct for these groups. And the things that we would typically say are vile are just part of the standard operating procedure for these groups. And so they can say there's a wise way to do this horrific crime. And they actually have an entire set of values that is grounded differently than ours. And the question then becomes, well, who gets to decide what values are really the true values we should follow? Or are there any objective truths about moral behavior? So that's the kind of thing we could probably explore in the next one. But again, we want to do it in a way that's not too preachy. So that's why I think this book it will move fast. I mean, it's a 160-page graphic novel, and it'll move. I think it moves pretty fast, just because of the nature of comic books. Yeah. So that's my hope, is that we can explore some of these, and given this character set we've developed, and in the end, is everyone going to end up? No, this is why I'm taking an approach where we have a longer, hopefully a longer run than just one or two books. But it also wouldn't surprise me if the way comic books are that we only get one or two books. So we're just trying to hold the entire project with an open hand.
Yeah, we're working on the script for number 2 now. That's probably what I should be doing when I get off this call. But I've got a 3-week-old baby, so I'll be doing some parent stuff, but maybe later tonight or something. But yeah, we've been going back and forth. We actually have a script. We've been going back and forth, making some tweaks because we realized we've got a little bit of time, and we're trying to do as much as we possibly can before we move on to the art and stuff. But I do think that there is a question, as we're recording this volume 1 is just out. We want to see, hopefully there is a market out there. And I think that as a Christian who loves comics, I always had this perception that there's just no Christian comics. So there's so few, and most of them are from years past. I think what I've realized just in the last couple of years trying to really seek out Christian comics is that there's more out there than I think, but there's still not a lot, and especially not a lot in comparison to the vast majority of secular comics that are out there. And so you'll see there's actually some really great creators who are trying to create a space for Christian comics, a corner of the comics world. But I think what we now need to do is get the message out to Christians. Any church I've ever been part of, any Bible study, I went over to a Christian's house and he had some friends over. I always have found at least one other person there who's a big hardcore Christian, hardcore comic book fan like I am. There's tons of Christians who love comics, but we just got to find them and then alert them to the idea that, hey, there's stuff out here. And I hope that it's, we're doing our best to make it good and worth your while. And so hopefully the right audience finds this, and we've got lots of stories to tell. So hopefully we can keep this thing going.
I think that what you just said, Jimmy, is something that we also think, look, this is a gateway book. Our hope is, if you like Christian comics or like comics at all, that this is a book that you can give somebody who likes comics and will open a conversation. So to that extent, what we want to do is provide you with the follow-up material. So all of our books, we always have a bonus package. And for this book, the bonus package is pretty robust. On the back inside cover of the book is the QR code. So if you wanted to know, like, how is this one minor character grounding his worldview? Because that's the character that is probably going to speak about Christianity a little bit. Well, how does he ground it? Well, we've got a digital copy of our Case Closed book, which is a short version of the case for the resurrection. So that's free to anyone who buys the book. They can download that. But also, this is part of our bonus package also, along with a conversation guide that'll address some of the issues from both secular and Christian worldviews. That's available with this. And why I thought of it was because Jimmy said, do you know how many other Christian, he's got a Christian comic book directory that was digital that we have as part of this also. So if you buy the book and download that, then at least you can look at it and say, oh yeah, I didn't know about these other Christian comic books, and you can look them up and find other Christian comic books. So also, by the way, our 30-session Casemakers course is now available through this book. So that's something that if you wanted to be able to communicate a Christian worldview better, that's the case that course we created for a seminary, Gateway Seminary. So it's a free course. It's got all the written material as part of it. Just take a look at it and see if it's something that'll be of value to you. But it's free if you buy the book.
Jim, you did God's Not Dead 2, so you're pretty much a movie star, right? So I am looking forward to I'm looking forward to Case Files, the movie starring Jimmy Wallace with Jay Warner Wallace in a supporting role. I can't wait to see it.
I can only imagine which
as Murph.
As Murph. I was just going to say, I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, exactly. No, I tell you what's funny about that too, is we definitely think that, we still, those people are still in my life, those producers and people are still in my life, but I don't know that this will ever go past this first stage, but I know this. I get residuals. Did you know that? I get a residual check. No. I get a residual check from Hollywood, the Screen Actors Guild, about twice a year.
Or something.
No, I got $1.12. I made $1.12.
Yeah.
Seriously, they sent me a check for $1.12 for my role in God's Not Dead 2.
I like how you said 55 cents and he was like, "Oh no, it's $1.12.
It was twice that much.
Don't rip me off, man.
It was more than twice that much.
It probably cost more to mail it and to put it in an envelope.
That's what I said. That's what I thought. I thought, why would you even? And I get those. I get about every 6 months. I get $1 or 55 cents. I think it probably was 55 cents once. I told Jimmy, I laughed about it. But somewhere between 50 cents and $1, I get every 6 months. Pretty good.
Hey, if anything, you need to write another book just so we can have you guys on again, because this has been super fun.
Well, thanks for having us. I really appreciate you guys so much. You know how much I appreciate your work. And by the way, Brian, you were one of the first people who ever hat tipped me at all when I first got started back in the day. So I still owe you one. Thanks.
We love you guys. Thank you so much for writing another great book, and we can't wait to just see where this goes. So Jimmy, Jay Warner, thank you so much. Blessings to you.
Thank you, and you too.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you have a question you'd like us to address or just a message for us, feedback, good or bad, you can either email us at podcast@apologetics315.com or leave a voice message for us using SpeakPipe. Just go to speakpipe.com/apologetics315 to leave us a message. And remember, if you include a Ghostbusters quote in your question, we guarantee that we'll read it on the podcast. We also ensure up to 50% better quality answers. Also, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review in iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. And please share this episode with a friend if you found it useful. Remember, you can find lots of apologetics resources at apologetics315.com. along with show notes for today's episode. Find Chad's apologetic stuff over at Truthbomb Apologetics. That's truthbomb.blogspot.com. This has been Brian Auten and Chad Gross for the Apologetics 315 podcast, and thanks for listening.